Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this last day of July 2019. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that easily by calling us at 1-800-472-0391. And we know, of course, a lot of you have that number just tacked up right next to your phone. So we certainly appreciate hearing from you, especially when you need a little more forecast information beyond the recorded information you'll get from our Alaska Weather Information Line. You can always find the same information at weather.gov/Alaska. One click on that map will take you to your location around Alaska, and one more click narrows it down to that exact spot on the map that gets your very precise forecast for the next 7 days there. You'll also find links to the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit, the Tsunami Warning Center, as well as the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, serving all of Alaska and even Hawaii. If you can't find what you're looking for, please let me know. I'm happy to help you in any way I possibly can. My email is always available, david.snider@noaa.gov, and it's always a pleasure to hear from folks all around Alaska. Looking at our fire danger, again, as conditions are still in some part of the drier season, but quickly coming to an end, we can still see some higher fire danger around the Fort Yukon area and the Yukon Flats, into the middle Yukon Valley and southward into the Koyukuk Valley and parts of the southwest, as well as the southern Susitna Valley. However, with west and southwesterly winds moving across the Bering in the next several days, we are already collecting some ample amounts of rainfall across the west coast. And especially across the west, we're seeing fire danger levels crash to near zero, if not below. And we expect to see that conditions will continue to improve across the interior and across south central as we go quickly into August there. So fire season seems to quickly be coming to an end, even though there are still fires being fought and hot spots that are being watched very carefully in many communities around the region. So not to diminish that in the least. However, we also know that seasonally things are changing very quickly. Let's take a look at the satellite picture now. Here is the visible satellite, and you know from watching the show with me for the last 8 years or so, visible satellite is my dear friend. I do love to see all the pretty things you can see, and one of the things I see today is a very definitive sharp edge here just south of Nome, south of Gamble and Sabunga, heading towards St. Matthew and well south of the Gulf of Anadyr. What is that? Well, watch one more time. See if you can see the direction that it's coming, and then put everything together there in your mind's eye of how the weather works and what direction that's traveling. And I think that's going to give you a really big clue. Once again, watch for that dip moving southward. What would that be? Clear, dry air moving south out of eastern Asia, coming out of the Chukchi Sea into the northern Bering. That could only be one thing, especially this time of year. That is cold and dry air. And as that is dropping southward into the Bering, we are seeing out ahead of that a lot of cloud development here and a decent area of low pressure sitting right here outside of Kotzebue Sound. So we're pulling in warm and wet air out ahead of it. We've got an ample amount of rain here across the west coast. Winds developing around the Chukchi, and then that cold, dry air push that's going to keep marching southward as hard as it can until it kind of falls apart here across parts of the Alaska Range. But out ahead of that, we do expect a healthy amount of southwesterly winds to start working in, and that is going to bring another surge of low pressure across the western Aleutians. With that, we set up about a day and a half's worth of a southwesterly fetch across the Bering Sea. A decent amount of southwesterly winds at this. Some of those winds around 3,000 feet or so off the surface are running around 60 to 70 knots. You'll see that in the aviation section in just a little bit. That matters because that's going to bring in a decent amount of moisture off the Pacific and work that into rainfall across the west coast, but also crank up the winds for parts of the North Slope. So as we were talking about yesterday, one concern is, especially for the Beaufort Seacoast area, that high surf could lead to some coastal erosion in that region as we get into Thursday, tomorrow, and then that could back off a little bit on Friday. But you might get into another repeat of that as we head into the weekend. A pretty unsettled pattern for especially our northern slope communities there going forward, and rainfall for sure for the west coast as we go into the next several days into the weekend. In the meantime, things are generally quiet around southeast. We've seen some areas of wet weather there for the central and southern parts of the Panhandle. Shower and thunderstorm activity generally across the border into British Columbia. Those storms have been drifting southward, so if we see any of that, it'll probably be south of Juneau, but generally north of Ketchikan, Petersburg area, let's say. Should keep an eye on some of those building clouds, but it doesn't look like we'll see any widespread risk from that right now. Here's our weather map, and you can see that colder air. It's exactly what we saw on satellite. That's the leading edge of that colder, drier air working its way into Norton Sound and over Nome. A few shower and thunderstorms popping up across the Ambler and Bettles region this afternoon. Areas of clouds fairly widespread across south and west. High pressure over the Gulf, low pressure sitting across the Alaska Peninsula. A weaker area of low pressure sitting across the southern parts of southeast. That's what's generating some of those showers. We're still seeing smoke across the middle Tanana Valley, of course, and low pressure is out across the western chain. A 996 millibar low there. Really not dropping into any substantial level, but the weather pattern is allowing that southwesterly fetch or movement of air coming in from southwest to start to build as we get into tonight. You can see the advance of that colder air quickly spreading out over the northern parts of Alaska and into the interior with widespread areas of showers. The rainfall will probably taper off a little bit here, but we do see a resetting as we get into your Thursday. Notice again that tight packing of the pressure gradients across the central and western chain with low pressure across the north slope, or I'm sorry, across the northern Bering, 994 millibars there, so that low is strengthening now. High pressure never really moves out of the Gulf. That should help to keep things fairly quiet and calm for southeast, really most of Prince William Sound, even Kodiak Island. Over the last 24 hours, we've seen a decent dose of fog around parts of Yakutat. No reason that couldn't happen again in some areas very close to the north and eastern Gulf tonight and tomorrow morning. The colder air working across the northern interior will kind of park up against the Alaska Range. Out ahead of that, shower and thunderstorm activity may develop a little bit more around the upper Tanana Valley and into the central parts of the Yukon. Showers will continue across the north. Once again, notice that tight packing of the pressure gradient here across the Chukchi Coast. Thursday is going to be the day for wind across the Beaufort Seacoast especially. So as we were saying yesterday, if you have property and belongings along the beach and the coast there for the Beaufort, might be a good day to pull those back tonight and then watch as the weather improves as you get into Friday there. And then as we get into the weekend, another surge of wind could be heading your way. The southwesterly flow will pick up across the Bering into parts of the Pribilofs and certainly the Yukon, Kuskokwim Delta, Norton Sound, and likely further northward as we get into your Friday. Watch as that low progresses to the north and east, heading toward the Bering Strait, heading toward Wales, Tin City, and Nome, Gamble and Savunga, and also the Chukchi Coast. We're looking at a lot of wind. A lot of this will be blowing offshore on Friday, but with that and the correlation or a coincident moment of more than average high tide levels, certainly something to watch for the region as the tides will be high already and the winds will be driving those waves up even higher on top of that. So keep watch on that for the west coast and the north as we get into Friday and Saturday. For Gulf Coast interests, things are going to be fairly quiet. High pressure around 1,030 millibars. Should break up some of the clouds in southeast and south central briefly. Showers develop a little bit more in earnest around the Alaska Range and into the interior as high pressure tries to slow some of that down up in the north. Let's take a look at your temperatures now. As we get into your Thursday morning, lower 50s across southeast, across south central, upper 40s and lower 50s there. Southwest, you're looking at temps in the lower 50s. About 53 for Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, 50 degrees for St. Paul and St. George. Gamble and Savuga, lower 50s there. Mid 40s for the north, still fairly mild. Fort Yukon holding around 55. Just a touch warmer there around Fairbanks. Across the middle Tanana Valley and northward, you're looking at temps in the mid 60s there, cooling off a little bit into the Brooks Range, Anaktuvik Pass, about 52. 40s and 50s for the north slope. Nome looking at 53, Unalakleet 60. And as you get into Dillingham, King Salmon, Lake Iliamna, you're talking about temperatures that are approaching that 70-degree mark. St. Paul and St. George near 60. Lower to mid-60s for parts of southeast. Cordova, Valdez, you're looking at highs tomorrow in the lower 60s. Glen Ellen and places out east, upper 40s to about 50 degrees overnight. 46 in Eagle, 50 around Northway, 52 in Fairbanks, 46 for Arctic Village, lower 40s for Kaktovik. Could be one of the cooler spots on the map there. Bethel looking at about 54. And Nunivak Island and Macoriac about 51 degrees. Sandpoint 55, Kodiak 54. On Friday, expect high temperatures back in the lower to mid 60s. Notice this Susitna Valley warms up sharply to about 70 degrees, another warm one, and mid to upper 60s for many in southeast. Ketchikan and Annette could approach 70 degrees. Cooling off around Utqiagvik and out toward Wainwright. Mid 50s for Nome, 53 for Gamble and Savunga, Adak and Atka in the 50s and 60s there to wrap up the week. Your climate outlook continues to point toward warmer weather through the beginning of August, at least the mid part of the month. In fact, much above normal temperatures there for southeast, south central, and southwest. Slightly cooler than average across parts of the north and east. And as far as wet weather goes, looks like a lot of that will focus on the north and the western sections, while most of the rest of the state is trending toward drier notes.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to aviation now. IFR conditions are expected to be fairly widespread around the Gulf Coast. You'll see that creeping into the Barren Islands, Kenai Fjords, Prince William Sound, up toward Icy Cape, Cape Fairweather, and on into the outer coast of Southeast, even pushing into the southern inside passage areas. For the interior, a widespread NVFR will start your Thursday morning. We will see pockets of VFR across 40-mile country in the upper Yukon into the eastern Alaska Range and also across parts of the western Alaska Range and the southern Susitna Valley and western Kenai Peninsula. As you get out toward Lake Iliamna, though, you're approaching Bristol Bay, you'll start to see NVFR filling in back for the YK Delta, parts of Norton Sound, and through really most of the Yukon Valley itself. IFR is also expected around the Chukchi Coast for Thursday morning. The really big focus for active weather, as we were just talking about, will be that southwesterly flow working its way out of the Bering and up toward the Chukchi Coast. Not only will that present us with turbulence and some possibility of some heavier rainfall than we've seen so far this season in the west, but it is going to keep visibility down as well. So IFR should be expected around the Chukchi Coast, pushing into areas of outer Norton Sound, Nunivak Island, St. Matthew, the Pribilofs, all the way down to the central and western chain. And really no big change over the central and eastern Gulf as we head through your Thursday afternoon. We will see some of that IFR peeling back out of southern southeast and poking its way into parts of Prince William Sound. Look for NVFR conditions across the upper Tanana Valley and the upper Yukon and into the northern Susitna Valley and parts of the Alaska Range. For Friday morning, really no substantial shift there in the weather pattern. We're looking at widespread VFR across most of the interior and parts of southwest, while coastal areas of the YK Delta, Norton Sound, Kotzebue Sound, and certainly the Arctic coast looking at NVFR, if not IFR conditions, and some of that IFR will be working its way into Yakutat with marginal conditions to start southeast and most of Prince William Sound. By Friday afternoon, again, no substantial change. You can see the IFR creeping north and east just a little bit more, really filling in across the Chukchi Coast and the Yukon Delta now as that weather front moves through. And again, periods of wind, rain, and probably high surf below that, of course, will be an issue with IFR conditions across a large part of the Gulf. Marginal conditions continue around Prince William Sound and southeast and really a large part of southwest as well. Here's a look at your pass conditions now for Thursday. We will see some improvement for Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, starting at IFR, leaning over toward VFR conditions as your day goes on into Thursday. For Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, watch for VFR to improve across the region on Thursday afternoon. Rainy Pass, though, leans the other way. VFR to start with an MVFR finish for your Thursday. Windy Pass probably holds at MVFR most of the day. Isabel Pass as well. Mentasta Pass looking for VFR to MVFR as you go through Thursday. Tanita Pass probably will see some improvement as your day goes on. Portage Pass lingers at marginal levels really most of the day. That'll be the Prince William Sound side being the main problem. And Chilkoot and White Pass we expect to see marginal conditions really most of your afternoon. The freezing levels show us that the 4,000-foot freezing line is digging into the Chukchi Coast. You can see the 6, 8, and the 10,000-foot lines really not too far off, but certainly a cold weather push coming in with that surge over the Chukchi Coast and the main storm track again from southwest to north and east. So a lot of residual warmth still lingering around the Gulf, but changes up north should be expected. Icing potential still not quite cold enough for a significant icing potential where most of you will be flying. We're talking about levels at or above 10,000 feet for most of the northern slope, and that should reach levels of isolated moderate. Not seeing any significant concerns beyond that just yet. The jet stream has that southwesterly flow that's going to take these Pacific storms and zip them right through the Bering and into the Chukchi Coast. So we're going to have some fast-moving storms and storms that are capable of being supported well with enough energy to make them a little bit stronger than they normally are for this time of the season. So we're watching for kind of some vigorous weather activity across the Chukchi Coast. The ridge of high pressure still exists, and it's still going to keep the focus across the west and northwest coast, and you can still see generally drier weather for the central and eastern parts of our state as we go into Thursday and Friday because of this pattern. But westerly flow will be the rule for the interior, 20 to 40 knots for most cases there, and will be kind of choppy and bumpy across the northwest. High pressure sitting across the central and eastern chain and also across the eastern Gulf, giving us a gentle northerly flow through parts of southeast. At 3,000 feet, you can see winds really fall off here as you move into continental parts of Canada, British Columbia especially, north and westerly flow coming across the eastern Gulf, and that stronger southwesterly flow, 30 to 70 knots here out across some of the lower altitudes for the central and western Bering Sea. So what about turbulence? You betcha. Out across the central and western chain below 4,000 feet, considerable moderate at least for some of these areas here. Don't be surprised if you find some isolated severe reports if you're flying through that region there. No doubt winds are going to be moving pretty quickly. St. Matthew all the way through the western Brooks Range and parts of the Kobuk and Noatak valleys and pushing into the northern interior for more thumps and bumps developing as we go into Thursday and Friday.
It used to be that you could only warn one person about a tornado after it had already blown down someone else's barn.
Now, on average, we're able to issue a tornado warning 15 minutes before the tornado's even there, and that wouldn't be happening without Doppler radar.
This NexRad system has reduced fatalities on the order of 45% due to tornadoes since its advent.
We have a lot more information now about storms and being able to understand how they develop, how they produce severe weather, and how that information might be used to improve warnings for our National Weather Service partners.
The lab is unique in that we serve the nation by supporting the National Weather Service in its mission to protect lives and save property by improving the accuracy and the lead time of severe weather warnings.
We have a legacy of radar research and converting existing technology from military to weather purposes.
A recycled Doppler radar led to the development of NexRad, installed nationwide in the early 90s. It allowed forecasters to see storms like never before.
Not only did we help bring that technology to the National Weather Service and to help protect lives and property, but we have continued to upgrade that technology, keep it relevant, and keep it state-of-the-art.
Recently, a major upgrade was added. Dual polarization technology takes the radar from 2D to 3D. Forecasters now know more about what type of precipitation is falling, which is very helpful during winter storms, as well as how much rain is accumulating, resulting in better flash flood warnings. The radar can also detect and track tornadoes based on debris. Looking to the future, the National Severe Storms Lab is testing the capabilities of phased array radar. Originally used by the U.S. Navy, the antenna scans the skies electronically rather than mechanically, allowing the radar to focus on a storm.
With current technology, we get a full picture or image of what is going on within a storm every 4 to 5 minutes. So it's more like a snapshot. Whereas with phased array radar, we get that picture of what's going on in the storm every minute. So it becomes more like watching a movie. So we can do adaptive, rapid scanning on the storms that matter most, being able to provide the information that's most relevant when and where it's happening.
Another advantage of phased array radar is its multifunction capability, providing weather and air traffic information simultaneously.
Number one, it is a system that promises to replace and expand upon the existing weather surveillance radars. Secondly, to replace aging air traffic surveillance radars. And number three, it offers a potential application to meet Department of Homeland Security and defense requirements for identifying and tracking non-cooperative aircraft. With the replacement of all these various radars with a single system, the American taxpayer could realize substantial savings in cost.
You have a lot fewer radars to maintain, and the electronic capability of this also reduces maintenance costs because you do not have moving parts.
Not too long ago, the ability to predict severe weather was thought to be impossible. During the past several decades, research conducted at the National Severe Storms Lab has developed life-saving tools like Doppler radar. We've progressed from no warning of threatening weather to about a 15-minute lead time, and current research promises to extend that much further.
Our knowledge of severe storms and how they behave, and our use and ability to use the Doppler radar technology is in a lot of cases a direct result of that close working relationship, that research to operations component that we get between the National Severe Storms Laboratory and a forecast office.
That history and understanding of how these data can be used by our users and doing the research to help advance the use of radar technology, really it's what we live for, it's in our lifeblood, it's in our history.
It's now easier than ever to be a part of weather research. We just launched the mPing app for both iPhone and Android users, and it's totally free. PING, which stands for Precipitation Identification Near the Ground, is a research project by the NOAA National Severe Storms Lab and the University of Oklahoma. With the mobile app, you can send us your weather observations on the go. Are snowflakes falling on your head? Is hail hitting your car? Just select what type of precipitation is falling and press submit. It's that easy. It takes about 5 seconds and it's anonymous. Reports can then be viewed online. Our scientists will compare your report with what the radar has detected. This helps us develop new radar technologies and techniques. Download the app today, share your reports, and let's work together to make our nation weather ready. Learn more here and follow us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska. And on to your sea ice update now. No big change from yesterday. You'll see a lot of open water across both coastlines there. And one thing that will likely change is well offshore as we get into the weekend. A surge of warmer air will be working its way toward the north in the main sea ice pack. And even as colder air is working behind that, it does look like it might loosen up some of this pack ice and maybe push that southward. And while that will put more marginal ice into what we see as an open area right now, it will also put a lot of that ice into warmer waters, which will likely melt that faster than you would see that closer to the coastline. So for the very latest information anytime about your Alaska sea ice, head to weather.gov/anchorage/ice. Here's a look at southeast now. Light winds will prevail with high pressure to your west. You can see that gentle flow coming in from the west and moving in from a northwesterly direction down the outer coast. 10 to 15 knots and 2 to 3 foot seas most areas. 4 foot seas north of Sitka. On the inside, 2 foot seas there with 10 knot winds in variable directions. By Friday, a little bit more of a northwesterly flow inside of Clarence Strait, up to 15 knots and 3 foot seas there. 15 to 25 coming down the outer coast. You're looking at about 5 to 7 foot seas, the highest of which will be outside of the Dixon entrance and south of Port Alexander. Prince William Sound, you're looking at southerlies, 10 knots and 2 foot seas. A south and easterly flow moving across the Barrens, picking up to 15 to 20 knots. Light southerlies moving up the inside parts of the Cook Inlet there, 25 knots and 6 foot seas, a little bit less on the head up to the north. A light wind coming across the southern and western parts of Cook Inlet and into the Gulf. It picks up even more, 25 to 30, 6 to 7 foot seas there. Still looking at some pleasant weather and light wind, small seas for Prince William Sound. For Thursday, a south and easterly flow coming down the Alaska Peninsula. The Bering Strait, Bering Sea coast, southeasterlies only bringing us 1 foot of a sea there across the Bristol Bay region. Light east and northerlies coming off of AKwx down towards Sand Point. A 15 to 20 knot wind there with 6 to 7 foot seas, and southwesterlies blowing through Shelikof Strait will produce 5 foot seas there on Thursday. By Friday, you can see winds are picking up across Shelikof Strait and also down the Bering Sea coast there, 20 to 25 knots with 4 to 5 foot seas. And further west, of course, higher seas are expected. More on that in just a second. As we go out to the west, southerlies working through Adak and Atka, building up to 35 knots across the western chain, 11 to 12 foot seas there. Light west and northerlies across the eastern chain, 4 to 5 foot seas expected on Thursday. You can see southerlies building in across the central and east as we get into Friday. And again, those higher seas around the Pribilofs, which we'll talk about in a moment, up to 13 foot seas south of Adak and Atka, and 8 to 9 foot seas on the Bering Sea side, 25 knots north of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. For the west coast now, we look at southwesterlies there building into Norton Sound, 10 to 15 knot winds there, 2 to 3 foot seas. South and easterly winds already building into St. Matthew, St. Paul, and St. George. 4 to 7 foot seas expected out there over the heart of the Bering. And as we get into Friday, you can see a dramatic shift into a stronger southerly flow. Not only will this bring rain and high wind, but certainly some higher seas, anywhere from 10 to 13 foot seas there. In general, and certainly higher seas are possible in the area with a southerly flow at 35 knots coming into Sabunga and Gamble, at least the southern part of St. Lawrence Island, 35 knots coming into Nome with 7 foot seas there, and Norton Sound and the entire region looking at some heavy weather, at least for a little while. Westerlies across the Beaufort Seacoast, 25 to 30, will produce some high seas and certainly some high surf. Breaking offshore, but minor coastal erosion could be possible in this type of a setup there, so be mindful of that and pull your equipment and property off the beach there, at least for a little while for Thursday. It should get better on Friday. Westerlies across the Chukchi and a strong onshore and persistent onshore flow with 5 to 6 foot seas there on Thursday. You can see more of an offshore flow developing briefly on Friday, 15 to 25 with 4 to 6 foot seas. Strong southerlies there coming through the Bering Strait at 35 knots, and westerlies persist on Friday, 25 to 30 with 8 to 10 foot seas there from Prudhoe Bay east toward Kaktovik. Recapping tonight's weather, a cold front is working its way in through the North Slope, and as that progresses southward, widespread areas of showers and probably some light rain should be expected. We will have stronger winds developing across the North Slope too, so again that minor coastal erosion will mainly focus on parts of the Beaufort Seacoast, but we're also expecting to see potential of some heavier rainfall across parts of the western sections of Alaska, and you can see that developing here at the stronger southwesterly flow working its way northward. Warmer air coming in and meeting up with the colder air should help to produce a decent pressure gradient, drawing in a lot of that warm and wet air, moving that broad area of rainfall into the west coast. And stronger winds there also mean that some stronger surf may be possible, and minor coastal erosion will also be a thing to watch for across the Beaufort Seacoast on Thursday and into Friday, but certainly from the Bering Strait all the way down into southwestern Alaska there as a 995 millibar low sits up just west of the Gulf of Anadyr. Most other places are generally quiet with showers over the interior. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.